Hi, welcome back to the Watchung Booksellers Podcast, where we bring you conversations from our bookstore's vast community of book professionals who talk about what they do for the love of books. Thanks for joining us. I'm Marnie, and I'm here with my co-producer, Kathryn. Hey, Kathryn.
Hey, Marnie. Hey, everybody.
Today, we've got a conversation between two journalists whose long-form articles have led them to creating books.
Yeah, Kate Zernike and Rachel Swarns are both award-winning journalists who have written groundbreaking works of nonfiction. Kate's book, The Exceptions, explores the story of discrimination of women in science and how a group of determined, brilliant women inspired radical change. Rachel's book, The 272, shares the history of Georgetown University and how America's most prominent Catholic priests sold 272 enslaved people to build it.
Both also happen to be local writers who've been great friends to the bookstore and held their launch events with us. They also happen to be extremely patient and forgiving as we've had some technical difficulties and they had to re-record their entire conversation.
Yeah, we can laugh about that now, but that was a rough email to write. Anyway, thank you, Kate. Thank you, Rachel. You guys are champs. Anyway, Marnie, what are you reading right now?
I am reading for an event that we're having this Thursday.
Yeah, that's right.
September 11th. It's called Atomic Hearts, and it's by Megan Cummins. She's going to be at the store speaking with Alice Elliott Dark. And I believe this came out in August. It's a novel, and I'm only about 50 pages in, but it's fantastic. I think you should come to the event and get a signed copy. It's going to be a great talk.
And Megan, was she a student of Alice's?
I thought
like
Alice had told me that she taught her. I'm not certain if it was at Rutgers or a writing workshop. I didn't get that information, but I'm sure they'll talk about it during their talks. So.
Yeah, that'll make for a great conversation too.
Yeah, I'm excited. How about you? What are you reading?
I'm reading a book called Among Friends by Hal Ebbett. He's a debut author, but this book has gotten lots of praise already. It was named one of New Yorker's best books of the year. And it was brought to us from our local friend and editor at Riverhead Books, Sarah McGrath. And she presented us with a few books on her list that are fantastic. And this is one of them. So I'm really enjoying it. It is some old friends who get together in the Catskills for a weekend. And they've got some simmering history that they're kind of contending with. And it all kind of explodes. So it's interesting. Really good. But anyway, let's get on to the conversation and hear from our wonderful guests.
Rachel L. Swarns is a journalism professor at New York University and a contributing writer for the New York Times. She's the author of American Tapestry and a co-author of Unseen. Her work has been recognized and supported by the National Endowment for the Humanities, the Ford Foundation, the Biographers International Organization, the Leon Levy Center for Biography, the MacDowell Artist Residency Program, and others.
And with her is Kate Zernike, who has been a reporter for the New York Times since 2000. She was a member of the team that won the 2002 Pulitzer Prize for explanatory reporting for stories about Al-Qaeda before and after the 9/11 terror attacks. She was previously a reporter for the Boston Globe, where she broke the story of MIT's admission that it had discriminated against women on its faculty, on which The Exceptions is based. The daughter and granddaughter of scientists, she is a graduate of Trinity College at the University of Toronto and the Graduate School of Journalism at Columbia University.
Enjoy the conversation, and we'll be back to fill you in on what's coming up in the store.
Hello again, Rachel. We're doing this again.
Again.
But it's always a pleasure to talk to you. So I'm happy to be here. I hope you are too.
Me too.
So I, at the risk of sounding stilted because we did this again, but I think we did it so long ago that I've actually forgotten your answer. So I remember having coffee or lunch with you at Raymond's when you first came to Montclair, but tell me how you came to Watchung Booksellers and...
Yeah. So, you were my go-to person when we moved to Montclair. So we moved here in 2013. So, 12 years. We were in D.C. So even though I'm a New Yorker and Henri is too, my husband is too, both of our boys were born in D.C. And it was really kind of coming back home because our parents, both sets of parents were in New York, and Henri was coming from the Washington Post to the New York Times. I was at the New York Times. So Montclair seemed like a really natural place for us to be. Henri actually had a cousin here.
Huh.
There are so many New York Times people here that it felt almost embarrassing to admit
I know,
that I was
absolutely. It's just, oh yeah, another one.
Where there, yeah. And I remember you were like the person who was like, okay, yes, and here's where you can go for this, and here's where you can go for that.
I actually finally had an email that I wrote to because people moving here from the Times would be like, tell me about the schools. And finally I was like, here's your automatic, my form email.
Yeah.
So,
and how did you come here? You came obviously before I did.
Yeah. So we came in 2007 because my husband, who's also a New Yorker, had a job in New Jersey. And so I was pregnant with our first kid. And so we didn't move here for, the usual, we didn't go through Brooklyn like most people do.
Right.
But yeah, my husband was working in New Jersey and it was just the commute from New York was a lot. And we knew people here both from his college class and also I knew people here from the Times. So it just seemed like a natural place. And then we find places like Watchung, which are, it just sort of feels like it's the kind of, like a great library and a great bookstore. It just sort of says something about the values of the town. So
it totally does. And, in DC we had Politics and Prose. And so like having an independent bookstore and an amazing library feels super, super important.
Yeah.
And super cool.
Yeah. But what I don't know, I think, or what I've definitely forgotten is how you got into journalism.
So I, started out as a elementary school student wanting to be a writer, wanting to be a novelist, and so convinced of my amazing narrative powers that I was, writing short stories and giving them to my friends as birthday gifts, okay? And it is really lucky that they stayed friends with me. And then somewhere along the way, I think in high school, I realized, oh, wait, how do you make a living like that? I grew up in Staten Island. I had an uncle who was a poet, but, we weren't writers. Like, nobody was a writer. It's like,
he was
okay.
published? Did he
Yeah.
make his living that way?
He didn't make his living that
Right.
way, but he was someone who was published and, was trying to live a writer's life.
Yeah.
And so I knew that, in fact, I actually had to make a living, and writing novels, that seemed like a harder way to go. So as a high school student, I went to Stuyvesant in Manhattan, and you could do a semester as an internship. And I wrote for a citywide newspaper, which was known then as New Youth Connections. And it was my first introduction to journalism. And, we had editors' meetings. We wrote stories about the city. I got published in the Daily News. I got to appear on PBS with Archbishop Tutu of South Africa. I had, a real kind of deep dive into this. And so by the time I went to college, I went to Howard University in Washington, D.C., I knew that I wanted to be a journalist. I never studied journalism, but I knew that that's what I was going to do.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Huh.
How about you?
I similarly was always a writer. I don't think I ever thought I would write novels or stories. I think I was just, I'm a third child, sort of like, in the way back at the station wagon, right? Like kind of observing two older brothers. Like I think my parents were a little uncertain I could speak until I was like 4. And so I think it really trains you to be kind of an observer and a listener. And so I was always really interested in the nonfiction world and sort of just the world around me and curious. And, but I don't think I knew how to be a writer. And then in college, the summer before then, I had talked to someone who worked in a magazine, and she said, well, you should write for the college newspaper, which is so obvious. And then I really didn't know even how to, I went to University of Toronto, which is huge. It was 52,000 students at the time. But my roommate said, oh, I know people at the newspaper. And so I went and I started writing for them. And it was just like, I think I got this, our listeners aren't seeing your face, but it is the thing, like you start doing it and it's just like your eyes light up and it's like, oh my God, this took. Yeah. Yes. It's just like, it was me and I loved it. And so I wrote for a year and then I was elected to be editor of the newspaper. And it was so I spent a year after graduation doing that. I went to Columbia and then I got an internship at the Patriot Ledger in Quincy, Massachusetts. And I was filling in for visiting town reporters for the summer for the internship. And they kept saying like, we're not going to hire you. We're not going to hire you. Like we don't hire interns. And then they hired me. But I have to say, covering those small towns was such a great experience because, first of all, you had to produce, I don't know if you remember copy when we described it in inches, but you had to produce 10 inches of copy every day from your town. So like if there wasn't a story, you had to find a story.
Right.
And so it was great training and it was fun and you just had to learn to talk to people. And I was, it forced me out of my shyness. And now I think about it, you look at the Times, like the people who came from that newspaper, Caroline Ryan, Michael Paulson, Lindsay Layton, really sort of, people who are top reporters, top editors now there. So it was fun and great training.
It is like those regional newspapers. I knew I was going to be a journalist from day one. So I was working at the newspaper. And also it was a time when, there were wars raging in Latin America. Also, I grew up in New York. I wanted to work in Latin America. So I was a Spanish major and a Caribbean African American Studies minor. And so I really wanted to work overseas. That was kind of my main thing. Books kind of was, I'd given up the novels. And so books were kind of, in the rearview mirror for me. And I also ended up at a great regional newspaper, the St. Petersburg Times, which is now
very famous.
The Tampa Bay Times, and then the Miami Herald. And, I'm a professor now, and, so many of those wonderful newspapers and small regional newspapers don't exist in the same way. But the kind of work I think that we did, I covered courts at the St. Pete Times. And again, I was writing 2 stories a day. I think it has been both invaluable for me, those early years of experience for my career at the Times. But I think, as a writer too, publishers, editors often say that journalists are great because we're fast. Some of my academic colleagues have a much more leisurely approach. We can't afford to have a leisurely approach.
I think that's true. And I also think sort of the professional curiosity, like you have to have a natural curiosity, but I think then you learn how to make use of that curiosity, how to find things out, where to go to find things out. And I think a lot of writers who come in, I'm always surprised by when I talk to other people and they're like, well, how did you find that out? And I was like, well, I asked here, I asked there. And it was sort of like, I think you get, I think that's a learned skill.
Yes, I think that's right.
But but I always thought with books, I just thought like, okay, I'm going to do this newspaper writing for a while. I don't think I had a plan. I don't know. But I think I thought I was always a reader and I loved,
me too.
I loved fiction, but I guess for me, you talk about being a foreign correspondent. Like my mother was Canadian, my father was Dutch, came to this country in their 20s. And so we would always go to see my grandparents in Canada or, for on rare occasions, we would be more oriented toward my father's family in Europe. And it was like, so I felt like I wanted to explore this country because I really didn't know much about it. And, I often say like it can be a foreign country. And so that was really exciting for me. But I think it's just sort of like the ability, I always say it's a passport to go out and ask questions and just sort of, so that was what I loved about it. But I do think I always thought that I was going to land on a story that would be a book and I would know it. And, it would be off to the races just like it was those early days of my college newspaper. And it didn't quite work out that way.
I think my parents always wanted me to write a book.
Completely. My father had that,
That was definitely something kind of in the back of my head. And I did, I think fiction was always kind of my heart. But I certainly thought still about writing a book. But it really wasn't in the forefront of what I wanted to do as a journalist, particularly in the early years. And
because there was so much else.
Because there was so much else. I really was so, I really was committed to wanting to work overseas. And I was just so thrilled to have the opportunity to do that in short stints and then with a posting. And that really was 100% about what I was focused on. And also, writing stories about this country that really brought them to kind of where the people were that I was writing about. So that felt really important to me. And in writing books, people always said, well, if you're going to do that, you got to really, really care about the story because you're going to be living with it for such
years,
a long time. And so I thought, oh, wow, well, again, I haven't I haven't felt that, but maybe it's coming.
Yeah.
Maybe it's coming. So talk about the first stories that brought you.
Yeah. My first book, I was coming back from my second maternity leave, and I was assigned to cover conservative politics. And it was the early days of the Tea Party. And so I just started going to these Tea Party rallies and talking to people. And again, it was one of those things where it was like, oh, wow, and there have been many books on this now, but I think there was a sense that, the Tea Party, maybe they're sort of like living somewhere off the grid in Montana, or they're all red states. And it was like, well, they were actually in suburban Philadelphia. And so I was doing some stories on the Tea Party. And I remember I went to there was the first annual Tea Party convention at the Country Music Hall of Fame in Tennessee. And I came back from that, and a publisher called me and had left a message just saying, like, we want you to write this book about the Tea Party. And that was an incredibly quick book. It was a 6-week turnaround. So this was
that
right.
I can't even begin to wrap my mind around how you did that.
But it was a little bit like, they said this to me, and I thought, so this was February. I think it was February 10th. And I thought, well, if I don't say yes to this, they're going to go to somebody else. And I really felt like I had been out there early on this story and I felt like if someone else told the story, I'd be mad about it.
Right.
So I worked out an arrangement with the national desk, and I said, I'm going to report and write for you until April, and then I'm going to take 6 weeks off and write this because it had to go to the publisher July 21st. And so it was very much building on my reporting for the paper, and turning that into book form. And it was a very different experience of my second book because it was, the publisher really wanted something that would just say to people, here's what the Tea Party is, which was a real question at the time, and they didn't want voice, they didn't want attitude, they just wanted straight down the middle, which I think in the end wasn't a great marketing decision because people either wanted to hate the Tea Party or love the Tea Party, and they didn't want something down the middle. But yeah, so that was different. And then my second book was I came back to a story that I'd done 20 years earlier at the Boston Globe about MIT and when it admitted that it had discriminated against women on its science faculty. And I'd kept in touch with the woman who had really driven that story. But I hadn't really thought about writing a book about it. And then the MIT press approached me not to write a book, but because they wanted to make a documentary about these women. There was a group of 16 women who had done this work to get MIT to admit this. So I went to be interviewed for the documentary, and then I was remembering there was more about the story, and then I learned more about the story. And then, as I reported it into a book, it became about women's history and a much bigger, much broader theme. So that was a very different experience. I'm trying to think, I started writing the proposal and reporting that in 2018, and it was published in 2023. So 5 years versus 6 weeks.
Yeah, that's a different experience. Yeah. But when you went to do that documentary, and from, there to the proposal, what made you convinced then that you had something and that this was the thing that it would feel meaningful to you, really speak to you.
I think I thought
in a lot of ways.
I think when they first said this, I had sort of forgotten the story, and what I'd remembered was that MIT, male president at the time, had done this really remarkable thing of saying, like, yes, we did this, and it was, this was 1999, which It was surprising to find out that there was discrimination. Not surprising, but it's surprising that the discrimination had been as blatant as it was, although it was sort of much more unconscious bias. But I sort of thought, oh yeah, MIT did this interesting thing, but I had forgotten all of the back and forth, and I hadn't known a lot of the back and forth and how it came to be. And it really it sort of became much more a story about Nancy Hopkins and her 20-year journey and really her whole career through science. And as I was reporting the book, I don't even think I realized this when I was writing the proposal. It just turned out that she happened to intersect with a lot of really interesting moments, both in the development of science and biology in particular, and women's history. So, for instance, the book begins in 1963, and it's just after Betty Friedan has published The Feminine Mystique. So that's happening in women's history. President Kennedy has his commission on the status of women. It's the year he signs the Equal Pay Act. In science, Nancy takes this class in biology with James Watson right after, 4 months after he and Francis Crick have won the Nobel Prize for decoding the structure of DNA. So it was just like, wow, I'm going to have this opportunity to tell a story about women in science, but also women and science separately, like the development of biology and how, biology sort of became this, it wasn't initially as accepted as a field as physics and chemistry. It wasn't seen as necessary. And now, of course, you look at the biotech industry, it's sort of everything in this country.
Right.
And so it really was an unfolding, which was kind of the great, I remember once, actually at the Times in the old Page One conference room in the old building, Isabel Wilkerson did a writing, like a little sort of older reporter to younger reporters seminar. I remember her talking about reporting as an onion, right? And so like, you have the outside that's kind of dry, and then it gets more kind of juicy, and there's like more flavor, and then you get into the inside, and it's like that sweet onion inside. And that, to me, I mean, that really was how this book unfolded. Like, oh, I can go down this road. And it would be finding, I found, like at some point, I remember I found the last ever, when Harvard and Radcliffe were two different colleges, I found the last ever Radcliffe yearbook, which happened to be Nancy's year. And the women were writing about the position of women and their hopes and dreams and frustrations in 1964, which was it's before, the National Organization for Women is formed. So they're really on the cusp. And it was just fascinating to read that. And another point, it was like, I was trying to figure out how many women and how many men were in a particular class at Harvard. And then that simple number count actually revealed something else about the change in women's interests moving towards science. So yeah, it was very much a slow process.
Yeah. I think that, I don't know, it's so interesting when you think about kind of the journey from, for both of us, it was, a story that we wrote for a newspaper that ended up kind of leading us down this path. And sometimes, you end up with the book itself and you're like, oh my gosh, like it's its own thing. Like how in the world did this happen?
Well, but tell me about the Michelle Obama book, because that, did someone approach you about that after that story?
And so that's how I got started with books, was that I was covering Michelle Obama's first year in the White House. And it was a bit of an unusual assignment. Most newspapers at the time had their White House reporters cover the first family. But, from the very beginning, and it wasn't just the New York Times, it was the Washington Post, it was the LA Times, it was AP, there was this sense that, we often like to think of ourselves as writing the first draft of history, and that this first African-American family in this house, this White House built in part with slave labor, was going to be written about for generations to come. So most of the big newspapers assigned someone to cover her. And it really started unfolding from the very beginning. One of our colleagues was writing about the president and his rainbow family and said, oh, what do we know about Michelle? And asked a genealogist to look. Of course, the genealogist had like 2 weeks and didn't find anything, and off we went with the story about Barack Obama and his rainbow family. But the genealogist kept digging, and then came back to us in September of that first year that the Obamas were in the White House and said, hey, I found some stuff, and would you be interested in doing some reporting on this? And I ended up flying to Birmingham, where I interviewed people and knocked on doors and looked at archival records, trying to find out anything about the First Lady's great-great-grandfather.
Because you knew they came from Birmingham?
Yes,
okay.
Because he was from Birmingham. And really the story ended up being about his parents, the First Lady's great-great-great-grandmother, whose name was Melvinia, an enslaved girl valued at about $450 in the 1850s, and Mrs. Obama's great-great-great-grandfather, who was a white man whose identity was a mystery. So it was a front-page story. It was news to Michelle Obama's family.
That's what I remember, yeah.
They talked about it in the briefing room, and then I got a call, just like, you did for your first book, from an editor at HarperCollins saying, oh, how interesting, this tiny snippet of the First Lady's family. What about a book about the whole thing? And, to be honest, it was one of those moments where I thought, yes, and then, well, wait. Like,
is there enough there, right?
Right, is there enough there? But not only that, like, I was still trying to figure out, like, how would I do this? Like, I've got 2 kids. I've got a mortgage. Like, will I get a leave? Like, what kind of, like, how is this going to work? Had to find an agent. And the first agent that I reached out to, who was really well known and used by a lot of people at the Times, her first response was, slavery, kind of niche.
Really?
And I was like,
and this is 2009.
This is 2009.
Wow.
And so then someone said, okay, well, why don't you talk to someone else? She was willing to meet me, but I was like, and that second agent said, I will get on a train and meet you in Union Station in D.C. And I said, I think I'm going to go with the agent who's getting on the train. And really for me, it was like when I had been doing the reporting for that story that I wrote about Mrs. Obama's ancestors, I don't know, it was like lightning hit me. Like doing this kind of archival work, seeing these records, holding these records, going to the place where this great-great-grandfather was buried. I don't know. It was like touching this history, being able to reach across time and having this kind of real, I don't know, tactile experience in a weird, crazy way.
It's like being at the newspaper again.
It was just
moves you.
Yeah. And so I actually had come back and said to Henri, you know, like, this is the craziest thing, but like, what do I do? Like, did I make a mistake? Should I go back and, you know, I had a master's degree, but maybe I need to get a PhD in history. He's like, maybe there's something else. And then this came along and I was like, okay. And so the book came out in 2012. And I felt like I was kind of in the wilderness then. You know, Dean Baquet, who was the editor at the time, you know, said to me when I was coming back, he's like, okay, you spent this time, 2.5 years actually, you know, working on this. What are you bringing us? And I was kind of like this deep passion and knowledge about
history.
19th century American slavery reconstruction. And we both laughed because it was kind of like, how useful is that? But I just kept trying to like write things when I could about it, trying to figure out what do I do with this thing. And then a colleague of ours in the business section reached out and said, hey, you know, I got this email from this guy, alum from Georgetown, who was pitching us on a story about a slave sale in 1838 organized by some of the nation's most prominent Catholic priests to save Georgetown. She's like, you know, I don't know if this is his story, but I think you might know. And I knew immediately that it was a story. And I also felt almost from the beginning that it was probably a book too, because this alum had teamed up with some genealogists to create a nonprofit, and you know, 272 people, men, women, and children, were sold by these Jesuit priests to save Georgetown, the nation's first Catholic institution of higher learning. And this alum was really interested in descendants. And when I started reporting on it, he had identified, his team had identified a handful of descendants. And I felt like, okay, so to me that, like, my first book allowed me to explore how slavery had shaped American families. I could see like, oh gosh, this is kind of the next step of what I want to do is how slavery shaped American institutions. But as a journalist, you know, which is obviously different, even though I spend a lot of time in history, what really felt urgent to me was making it present for people. And so finding descendants, I was like, okay, if I have my wish list, I want a kid. I want to follow, you know, there's so many people who, slavery, no thank you, not interested. But the story of a boy, you know, who's torn from everything he knows and goes on this journey, I thought I could bring readers with me on that journey.
Yeah, I mean, that's when you were talking about your conversation with Dean and sort of like, oh, I'm bringing back my deep interest in history and art. Like, I actually think it does informs your reporting to have an understanding of the debates of the past in this country, because then you know what's fresh, you know what themes we're carrying over. I mean, you think about, like, you know, going back
actually,
to
I think if we think about for both of us and our books and the moments that we're in, right? I mean, your book coming out, I mean, all of this reckoning about women and gender and, you know, that is really present. And the same with, you know, race and how we're reckoning with it. And I think having that grounding in history makes it just helps us to understand and to explain.
And I also think it actually makes me feel more confident. Like, you know, when I think about even the Tea Party stuff and understanding conservative politics and understanding Goldwater and, you know, probably going back before that, I mean, it makes you feel more confident in your writing now and in sort of your analysis of what's happening now. But I also think that the difference is, like, I imagine you with the Georgetown story, and you've got all these descendants, I mean, probably countless descendants, how, like, in a newspaper story, you would maybe be able to quote 3 of them, right? So I can pretty well imagine that when you heard this, you knew this is a
Yeah.
book because you just want to dive deeper into it.
Yeah. Again, it's very funny though. I always feel like I have trepidation. I'm still, and I want to talk about your writing process. I always love talking about, but I'm still someone for whom the blank screen, I'm like, oh
Yeah,
my
I know.
God,
Forget it.
It's just the worst. So I kind of knew that this was a book, but I also was kind of terrified because my life was different. Like the archives, I was in New York now. The archives were in DC. I had 2 young children, and just trying to figure out like how would I actually navigate that. My children were a little older when I was in DC. I had a nanny who was like our lifeline, and now I was juggling more, and I just wasn't sure. And I had friends who listen to me kind of work through like, can I do this? Can I do this? And they're like, yeah, I hear you. And yep, I think, yep, you can.
Yeah.
But I wasn't certain, actually. I really was not.
Yeah.
I was certain it was a book. I wasn't certain I could do it.
Yeah, I think it's, and also books are such a mystery because it's really, I mean, I think even in my experience, publishers and editors don't know what works. It's like they think it's, it's all kind of magical thinking for them too. Like, well, we think this is going to work, but then it's not. It comes out at an odd moment. And the book they think is going to be a blockbuster is a flop. Not a flop, but it doesn't, it's not the moneymaker they think it's going to be. But I think, in terms of the writing and the blank screen, it's like, so you're going to do all this reporting and then you're going to sit down and write, having not written anything for a year or something. It's just that's really, you get out of practice.
Yes. Yes.
And so that's scary. But I also think just sustaining people's interest over a book length is a much different process. I was having trouble when I was writing my second book, understanding so my book editor had parts she liked and parts that she didn't like. And I really couldn't understand what the difference was. I didn't know what it was that was making her like the stuff that I did. But I got kind of interested in this somewhat obscure but important debate about recombinant DNA in Cambridge, Massachusetts in the 1970s. And that debate ultimately gave rise to the biotechnology industry and explains why biotechnology is so concentrated in Cambridge, particularly in Kendall Square. And it was like this town gown fight with, locals and Harvard and, it just had a lot of color. There was a very colorful mayor at the time. And so I was like, I'm really interested in this. It's funny. It's got a lot of like good color. I imagine Kathy's going to tell me to cut it, but I'm just going to go ahead and do it anyway. And of course I write it and she gets back. She's like, it was the best thing I'd done. And I was like, so tell me, like, why did this work for you? And she said, well, when it's not working, she said, it's because you're doing that newspaper thing of fact,
right,
quote, right?
Yes.
And you're presenting information. You're not telling a story.
Right.
And I think, a lot of times in newspapers, we do tell stories, but there is a pressure in a newspaper story to move the news along. You can't tell three stories of 3 characters. It just sort of, it starts to get repetitive and it's like, no, cut that. We don't have enough space. Readers' attention spans are getting shorter and shorter.
Right.
So that was a revelation and also like such a delight for me to be able to do that. And then you can stretch these characters and these references out over 300 pages.
Right. Yeah. Of course, it's both similar and dissimilar, right?
Yeah.
Because we're writing, but it's writing a different way. And I think it is true. It's like with journalism, and we're both writing nonfiction. So, I mean, the facts obviously really matter, but it's kind of absorbing and getting above the facts, about really interpreting them and creating a narrative that's going to carry people along. And as you said, taking your time a little bit with it. So it's in many ways, I feel like it is the first book. I thought, oh my gosh, like it is both the most amazing thing and the hardest thing. And I want to do this like forever. And then it was kind of like, well, how do I do that? Yeah. But then in the Washington Bureau of the New York Times where I could see, oh, wait, there is a way in which people write a book and then they report for 4 or 5 years and then they write another book and they find another story, write another book. And I thought, okay, that feels like something that might be doable. Right. And now that I'm a professor at NYU, there's just, and writing, publishing and writing is all about what we are all doing. I have even, it just feels like even more of a luxury to be able to to kind of do that. But I would say, though, that I think the journalism actually helps in that regard. Like, I find actually that because I still write 3 or 4 stories for the Times a year as a contributing writer, freelancer, that, you know, writing the shorter stories actually really helps. It's like, it's that kind of thing like,
it's a muscle.
Oh, it is. It's kind of like, oh, wait, I can do that. I can do that fast and just be done. Because, you know, as you said, you know, if you're taking a year or more, my book in the end took 7 years.
Wow.
I don't know. There is something about just doing the writing and reminding yourself that you can do it really fast and well. That I feel like is helpful to me, you know, in the book writing process too.
I also think I brought back. I don't know,
that is definitely true.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's worn off a little bit now, but just from it's worn down. But I remember, you know,
it's been 2 years for both of us, right?
Yeah.
2023.
Well, and I came back to the Times in 2022.
Yeah.
But I think in the beginning it was definitely, you know, I was like, oh, I'm sitting down, I'm telling a story, even if I am going back to that fact quote thing, like I'm still telling a story.
Right.
And I had gotten to the point in the book, for some reason, I remembered incorrectly, it turned out, that I thought I was supposed to read my book for the audiobook.
Oh,
so
gosh,
at a certain point,
I've never done.
Right. Well, first of all, it's a huge undertaking. It takes a lot of hours, but it was also, it was really good for me when I was writing because I was like, well, I don't want to write. I would read aloud.
Which is super helpful,
yeah,
I think.
And I was like, I don't want to write a sentence that I don't want to read.
Yes.
Read aloud.
Yes.
So the kind of taking that training, that was like it was a different muscle, but also a useful one.
Yeah.
And again, I ended up coming back to the Times and I was covering abortion. And so I had all this sort of women's history in the back of my mind, which I think was important. And, you know, more lately, I've been writing about science. And so that's, you know, I have all these sort of connections at universities and in that world and understanding sort of how the scientific enterprise was built up and now how it's being torn down.
Right.
So it's all connected.
I want to talk a little bit about, you know, doing this work as a woman and as a parent. Like sometimes during COVID, there were all these, you know, on social media, you know, whoever it was, whatever, you know, Enlightenment person during the bubonic plague, you know, got so creative and, you know, pounded out this amazing thing. And I was like, you know,
snowed under,
totally snowed under. I had to do, one of my children could not do Zoom, like just simply could not. So I was his teacher.
Wow.
I was teaching my NYU students on Zoom. I had another child who also needed support. Then, of course, you know, just my life.
Where do you buy groceries?
Yes,
right,
it was just, I was getting up at 4:30 in the morning and saying to myself, if I can write 200 words a day, that's what I'm going to do. And I spent, and actually it was funny too, because I had read the Caro book about working, about how he works. And he would say that, you know, I put on my suit and walk down the hall.
Office.
Yes.
Yeah.
But honestly, during the pandemic, I was like, I am getting dressed. I am putting on some lipstick and I am writing 200 words. Yeah. And it both allowed me to keep going. But also, I don't know, it made me feel empowered. But I often feel like we don't I would love to read more about women writers and the juggles that we have when we're trying to do this kind of work.
So there's a character in my book who he won a Nobel Prize, Gobind Khorana, and he says he works at MIT, at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology with Nancy Hopkins, and this is in the 70s, so this could go far, but he came to work every morning with the $5 for lunch that his wife had given him. And what he said to Nancy was something like, well, if I had to think about having the money, how would I get my science done? Right.
Right.
So it's just like, and so what she said is like, you really, I mean, my mother used to say to me, like, when I was like, I need my mommy. She was like, no, you need a wife. Like, and I really think, so much of the world, including journalism, was built with the assumption that there was someone behind the curtain.
Absolutely.
Raising the kids, making the lunch, remembering to pin the lunch money to the coat or whatever it is. So I think, I think we don't talk about it in, when I think about the Times and early on, like I never wanted to put up my kids' artwork because I always felt like...
I know, actually...
And that's changed.
I know that has changed, and I think that's a good thing.
Yeah.
I remember in the Washington Bureau, Robin Toner, one of the great political correspondents for the Times, I think the first woman, right, to serve as the chief
national political correspondent.
Yep. She told me, if your nanny calls in sick, tell them you have a flat tire.
Yeah.
And really that was because otherwise they will not take you seriously. Yeah. And I know that has changed, and it needed to change because that's just crazy.
I love you bringing up Robin. Robin was the first person. I was in the Washington Bureau when I was pregnant with my first child, and she was the first person at work I told that I was pregnant because I really felt like, Robin did this. I can do this. And if I tell Robin, I'm going to be able to do it the way Robin did it.
But, there are those kinds of realities. Now, I'm super lucky because, my husband has been like such an amazing supporter. But I just think like...
but the emails from the school come to you.
Right. Yeah. That's right. And I just feel like, I don't know. I want to hear more about writers and their lives and how it's sometimes you see the finished product, and I just feel like the messiness of kind of stitching it together is both interesting to me, but I think it's good for people to know. Like,
Absolutely.
it's a journey. It's hard,
But what I guess one thing I wonder too is sort of the, I think this gets talked about a little less than the emotional layer that we're talking about, is how much women are taken, like most of the female writers we think about are novelists, right? They write fiction. So how much women and women's voices are taken seriously, how much weight those voices carry when they're writing nonfiction. That's one thing that interests me. And the other, which someone said to me recently, they think it's maybe not true, but I've heard that women don't buy nonfiction as much, that they're more...
Oh, that's interesting.
They're more the fiction, right. So the nonfiction market is really for men. And so you see that, the books that are bestsellers are often like adventure stories or business books or... so I wonder about that. And I wonder if it's all part of this whole debate about whose voices we value, who gets to tell the stories, which ends up affecting how our national or international or life story is told, right?
Absolutely.
So that's another part of it, I think, that's worth exploring.
Yeah, I think the who gets to tell the story is a really important thing.
And it's a theme in both of our books.
It is, absolutely. Yeah. And I think, we're obviously in a moment where, the questions of race and gender are, being kind of pushed to the sidelines, and that's putting it politely. Definitely who tells a story is important, and widening the opportunities for a range of people to tell those stories is really important. But when I was writing my second book and trying to figure out how to finance it, and dear listeners, the advance does not cover all of this. And so I've always gone around, getting some grants, getting some fellowships or whatever. And, I went to the Ford Foundation and said, hey, how about, here's what I'm doing. How about funding, a grant of some kind? And they agreed.
So you went to Ford Foundation and they didn't have, it wasn't a particular...
Oh, no. I went, wow. I am kind of the
Brave
knock
Rachel.
on any
Good for
door.
You. That's fantastic.
The same with selling a book, though. Sometimes you get, like I'm also thick-skinned. People say, no, we don't want to give you any money. Or no, like the selling of the book, going like,
you gotta
hey,
go try again.
Yeah, I'd love to give a talk
great.
here.
That's journalism experience.
That's journalism, right. Yeah. I actually, one of my favorite, it was just one of these funny things that happened when I was doing a talk at Stanford. And so I was looking around, could I do a talk in the community somewhere? Oh. And I reached out to some venue, which I don't remember, saying, hey, I've got this book. And this was actually the Michelle Obama book. And, I'd love to, talk about. Yeah. And they were like, isn't it a little unseemly that you, the writer, like you don't have people like who are, and I was kind of like, no, I don't have
times
people.
People write to me like, well, if you want to give us an assistant's name and we'll deal. I was like, yeah, that would be me. Maybe I should invent an alter ego. Kathryn over there is doing that for me.
Right.
Yeah.
So, what are you working on now? Are you thinking about book number 3?
I am thinking about it, and I think I remember early on after my book came out, my book editor said, well, you could go the women route or the science route, and it really seemed like a question. And now I feel, given what's happening in the country, I really feel compelled to go down the science route. So I'm thinking about books there. I don't quite know. It's hard. The market is changing.
Right.
People's attention spans are changing.
Right.
So I think it's hard to I'm still figuring out what the exact narrative would be. What you said. What's the thread that's going to take you across 300, 400 pages, or
right.
maybe 200, whatever. But but those are the general themes I'm thinking about. How about you?
Yeah, it feels like my book came out in 2023, yours too, right?
Yeah.
So 2 years. So I'm kind of like, oh my gosh, people are like, and I'm like, what are you doing next? I'm like, I know, I'm doing something. So I am still, I'm still interested in kind of slavery and contemporary institutions.
Yeah.
So I'm still digging kind of in that realm. I'm right now working on a digital project that I think will kind of help with the research, where I'm looking to create a digital archive where people will be able to see in their communities kind of how slavery and contemporary institutions are tied together. Like one of the things I really want to do, bad timing, Rachel Swarns, but I really want to help Americans understand better the connections between slavery and contemporary institutions around us. And we're in a moment where a lot of people don't want to hear about it. And also, too, that, okay, I can write for the New York Times, I can write books, but, media is so polarized. Half the people don't want to listen to you because you write for the New York Times. So, but I feel like if it's local, like if you could tap on a map on a website in your town, your state, and then tap on the bank and then see the primary source document, the sale, the mortgage of the enslaved people that is tied to the bank that you drive past, that will be more meaningful and more tangible to people. So I'm looking at financial institutions, religious institutions, and educational institutions, and kind of gradually trying to build this first a prototype, and then the funding situation from the federal government, NEH, NEA, not so promising. But still, I've got some seed funding from NYU, so I'm doing that. Meanwhile, my son, who is going to college in a couple of weeks, said, no more books, Mom, until I'm out the door.
I get it.
So I can use him as an excuse and say that I'm honoring his request as I dig. But yeah, I'm looking forward to the next one.
I will tell you, I have tried to get my boys to read, who are teenagers, to read my book, and they didn't do it. But I was in the car with my son. We were doing a college trip, and a teacher at his school had recommended a book to him, so we started listening to that on tape, and he really didn't like the narrator, and I was like, okay. So we tried another book. I can't remember what the reason for that one. And finally I was like, well, we could listen to my book. So I put it on, and I have to say there's a wonderful narrator, not me. And we're listening to this. It's like, Mom, this is really good. I was like, thank you. So I think we might get a little more support. Although, yes, I think they would like me a little more present than you can be when you're writing a book.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, at the high school, on several occasions, my son took AP African American Studies this year. So my book came up a couple of times in his class, and he was just like, quiet. And he's like, Mom, you cannot speak at the school until I leave, except that his girlfriend ended up being on a committee for an event where all of a sudden I was desirable. Yes. And then it was okay.
Oh, that's fantastic. So did you speak at the high school?
I did. It was really fun. And he also was kind of like, wow, that's kind of interesting.
Right. I didn't know you did all those things. I thought you were just like up there online shopping or something. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, so it sounds like the digital project, actually, I'm thinking that could be amazing. It brings us back to Montclair, because I think about all the different, maybe not slavery, but certainly probably slavery, but also just in terms of historic Black institutions.
Yeah, I mean, New Jersey was the last northern state to have enslaved. There were enslaved people in New Jersey in the 1860s. So there is lots to do, lots to uncover here in New Jersey for sure.
Wow.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
It's crazy.
Well, I'm really excited to hear more about that. I hope you do get more funding. And I think, honestly, I mean, we know, right? Just because the political climate has changed doesn't mean that it's not still an important story to tell. Right. It makes it more important.
Right. And then we're thinking about audience and how, and I think we're actually, as journalists, very attuned to that. We're not just, it's about kind of how to bring it to people, how to make it compelling, how to bring people in.
Yeah.
And I think we think about that in our work all the time. And so with books in this climate, I think, we've got to do more of that.
Yeah. So tell me what you're reading now.
I've got a couple of books. One right now, I'm reading a book, a biography of Frantz Fanon. It's called The Rebels Clinic, The Revolutionary Lives of Frantz Fanon, by Adam Schatz, who was in one of my fellowship groups when I was working on my book, The 272. I also have a book called Illiberal America, A History by Stephen Hahn, who is a Pulitzer Prize-winning historian of my period, who is just a great writer, historian, and has been just such an important person for me in my career. And that's next on the nonfiction shelf. But fiction. So I love mysteries, thrillers. So I am going to say Heartwood, and I'm going to say Amity Gage. Am I right about that? Okay. Yes. And also Stoneyard Devotional.
Oh, yes.
Which I just think, how do you even describe that? Nuns, mice, middle age, friendship. But what can you say? Like, I think... anyway, I think, and actually, I really want to, Heartwood, it's a thriller, but it is more than that. So anyway, I truly love both of those books. And I really love Adam Schatz's book.
That's great.
Yeah. And how about you?
And having known where it came from.
Yep.
So I am reading Knife by Salman Rushdie, just because I've had it on my nightstand, and now there was a window.
Right.
I don't normally do this, but I have a bunch of books going at the same time. I just bought, on the recommendation, a very slim little book called The Usefulness of Useless Knowledge.
Oh, interesting.
Which is by a guy named Abraham Flexner, who sort of designed medical education in this country. But he wrote this, and it's really about basic science and how understanding, like how what we do actually does lead to things down the road. And we think at the time it seems useless, but anyway, so I think that's sort of to underlie my questions about science in this country. I'm also reading a very thick book. So I got the thin and the thick. Thick one is called The Eighth Day of Creation, which is a history of molecular biology. Not everyone's cup of tea, but it's pretty fascinating. And then for fiction, I just finished a book that was edited by my book editor, Kathy Belden, called Flesh, which is just amazing. It's quite haunting. Yeah. It's got a very arresting cover too. It's an apple that is completely bit, the flesh of the apple is gone. But it's quite haunting. It's a story of a young man. It's sort of I guess it's a coming of age story, but not really. It's sort of this young man from about 15 or 16 to, his 50s. And it's I think his mother of two sons. It's also particularly haunting. So,
okay. Well, then I got to take a look at that.
Yeah. So
okay.
Anyway,
lovely talking to you.
You too.
Again.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you, Kate and Rachel, for coming in twice and sharing your insights with us. Listeners, you can find the links to their books and all the other books they mention on our website and show notes.
And please join us for some of our great events coming up. This Wednesday, September 10th, the Montclair Public Library and Partners for Health present Richard and Leah Rothstein, who will talk about Just Action, how to challenge segregation enacted under the color of law. And on Thursday, September 11th, as Marnie mentioned, author Megan Cummins will discuss her debut, Atomic Hearts, with Alice Elliott Dark.
And next week on September 18th, we welcome Melissa Rothkopf Bates to talk about the secret life of chocolate chip cookies. And on Friday, September 19th, Bobby Brown will launch her memoir at her home away from home at 18 Label Street. Drinks and a photo session with Bobby are included in the VIP tickets.
You can get details and purchase tickets for all of our events and book clubs through our newsletter, show notes, or at watchungbooksellers.com.
The Watchung Booksellers Podcast is produced by Kathryn Counsell and Marnie Jessup, and is recorded at Watchung Booksellers in Montclair, New Jersey. The show is edited by Kathryn Counsell, and original music is composed and performed by Violet Mujica. Research and show notes by Caroline Shurtleff. Thank you to the staff at Watchung Booksellers and the Kids Room for all their hard work and love of books.
And thank you for listening. If you enjoy the show, please like, follow, and share it. You can follow us on social media at Watchung Booksellers. And if you have any questions or ideas, you can reach us at wbpodcast@watchungbooksellers.com.
We'll see you next time. Until then, for the love of books, keep reading.